Okay. Well, there's one. We went through chapter 1 of Democracy, the God That Failed here, and I think the final paragraph is so powerful. I just wanted to read it out. Hoppe says, ultimately, the course of human history is determined by ideas, whether they are true or false. Just as kings could not exercise their rule unless public opinion accepted their rule as legitimate, so democratic rulers are equally dependent on public opinion to sustain their political power. It is public opinion, therefore, that must change if we are to prevent the process of de-civilization from running its full course. And just as monarchy was once accepted as legitimate, but is today considered to be an unthinkable solution to the current social crisis, it is not inconceivable that the idea of democratic rule might someday be regarded as morally illegitimate and politically unthinkable. Such a delegitimation is a necessary precondition to avoiding ultimate social catastrophe. It is not government, monarchical or democratic, that is the source of human civilization and social peace, but private property and the recognition and defense of private property rights, contractualism, and individual responsibility. Very powerful. This reminds me of the end of human action, actually, where Mises says that, for most tools, the most useful tool is going to win out in the marketplace. But when it comes to the ideology or social system that we create for ourselves, that we organize ourselves within, that's not the case, right? It is very much decided in the court of public opinion. And so this, along with that quote from H.G. Wells, that education is a race between civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. These are like my two lightning bolt moments where I'm like, holy cow, we really have to educate people about the importance of Bitcoin and private property more generally. And, checks and balances, at least, if not minimization of government. And it just seems like we've strayed so far, it's incredible that we sit here in this seat of arrogance thinking we're, modern geniuses compared to our ancestors. But in fact, we've lost our way in so many respects.
Yeah, and democracy has sort of like become a god, right? Like it's sort of taken as an intrinsically good thing. And I don't think that's the case. I think we've shown over, 2 podcasts in 6 hours or something like that, that it's there are certain incentives in democracy that are completely antithetical to natural law. And it does sort of like allow for, mob rule, more war, fiat money, welfare state, all sorts of things that I think we would see as kind of bad. And the unfortunate reality is that, democracy has a lot of flaws, and it very well may be like what Hoppe says, that we may someday look back on it and say, how could anyone have done a democracy? Because it is clearly, draws very murky boundaries between public and private property, thus, violating a lot of natural law, which, hopefully is at least internal to most people. So, in a sense, like, we've been propagandized about democracy, I think, and we're all sort of have a sense that it's intrinsically good when it's really not. There are flaws with it, especially with the incentive systems around it. But that said, like, I don't know if something better will be tried necessarily. I think a very limited government, or even something like anarcho-capitalism, as is Hoppe's preference. I don't know if that's going to come about anytime soon. But in the meantime, I think we need to be aware of the cognitive biases that we might have towards democracy because of what we've been propagandized with, and recognize its realities, that it is very flawed, and that there are sort of tendencies towards fiat money, the welfare warfare state, and particularly in the absence of God, towards just unimaginable evil that is possible within this structure, because it can very easily lead to something like communism. So, yeah,
excellent points. I'm reminded of, I don't know if you ever saw this on Twitter, but there was this sequence of local news anchors, and they were all reciting the same trope. They were like, "It's very dangerous for our democracy," and they were there was a whole spiel, but they were word for word repeating one another.
The same exact thing. Yep.
Yeah. So, as we've touched on here, these ideologies wrap themselves in this moralistic camouflage that protects them in the court of public opinion. So how do we pierce that veil? Like because if you walked out, I'd say, into anywhere in the US and you approached someone and said, democracy is a scam, I mean, I would think they would think you are crazy, right? Or some kind of crazy anarcho-capitalist or whatever. But how can we, because this is not an unsophisticated argument. Like, this is pretty high brass intellectual argument to some extent. I mean, you need to understand time preference and these other factors. How can we pierce that veil of moralistic camouflage that democracy is wrapped in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suspect that we have to use the same tools of propaganda that have been used on us to make us believe that democracy is this amazing thing. I mean, there are people that have read this book and have started, talking about it as, okay, it's democracy isn't all that. I don't know. There needs to be better rhetoric, better memes, better ways of looking at it. I do suspect that younger people are much more open to that idea, and particularly in places on the internet that are not frequented by polite people like 4chan. This sort of idea is actually like, yeah, it's obvious that democracy is not all bad and monarchies are probably better and so on. But this is kind of how things change. It's not obvious to us now that democracy is has all these flaws. But maybe 50 years from now, it will be obvious, and people will try something better based on the flaws that it has. Hopefully, from a priori thinking, right? Like from rationalistic perspective of, okay, what are the things that we're optimizing for? Well, it clearly does not optimize for these things, so therefore, let's try something that will optimize for these things. And that's where I think we have to go. I think Bitcoin brings about something better even within a democracy or monarchical framework. It just has that sort of like purifying element to it, because it makes money honest, and it takes away this great evil called fiat money that's used to oppress people by every government. So that's my hope, and we'll see exactly how that will work, but I suspect that if you're going to convince people that democracy isn't all that, it has to start with the young people, and it's going to take at least a generation.